right, here we go. What's going on, everybody? And welcome back to Comic Breakdown. Today we are with Trevor Fernandes Lenkiewicz. He is the creator for Area 51, the Helix project. He is also having a Kickstarter that is ongoing, which is Minutes to Midnight, the hour between life and death. Trevor, why don't you go ahead, say hi, and a little introduction.
Yeah, man. Well, it's awesome to be here. It's awesome to be hanging out with you, bro. I like your shirt, by the way. I didn't get to say that off screen. Yeah, my name is Trevor. I write, edit, and art direct a couple of comics. The first of which was a 6-issue series called Area 51, the Helix Project, which we've just wrapped up. So all of those issues will also be available as add-ons on the current campaign for the biggest creative swing of my career in Minutes to Midnight, the hour between life and death, which I'm incredibly excited for you guys to check out. It is a 64-page, basically annual collection of short stories, all written by me, but you get a little bit of variety in a host of global comic book artistic talent that are spread across these 4 stories. So, the big question for this project is what connects a paranoia-induced detective thriller, a supernatural coming-of-age story, a Dante-esque historical fantasy, and a sci-fi futuristic drama. Well, it's this idea, this theme of perspective, right? And I'm sure we'll get into that further, but it's a huge swing. We're pushing boundaries and our understanding of the comic book medium and what it's capable of doing. And I hope you give it a look. It is a real passion project. And I'm so excited to be here to talk about it today.
Yes, I'm actually very excited about it too because, like we've talked about before, I put quite a bit of money into the Kickstarter for Area 51 issue number 6, and I got drawn into Minutes to Midnight, so I'm very excited to see how that story plays out, where it goes, how my likeness is involved in that. It's the first time I've ever done something like that, and so it's going to be cool. I'm going to try to get an issue each for each of my kids and have them have that. Just a cool little thing, a keepsake, if you will. I think it's a cool concept, though. I like the idea, just, a lot, because that's something that indie creators have been doing, a lot more in recent years, is letting people have the opportunity to be drawn into their comic. And it's fun. It's a good way to connect with your fans and make them more connected to the comic and so on and so forth.
I agree, man. It's such a unique opportunity. And that's the cool part about crowdfunding. Like, I acknowledge as a consumer, there's a little bit of skepticism because it doesn't always feel like the safest route that, for most of the time you're dealing with unproven creators. I mean, I'd like to think that after fulfilling 6 of these, that there is an element of insurance there. But the unique opportunity is that you can do cool things like this, where I can have one of these incredibly talented artists immortalize someone in a book. You know what I mean? That's something like that is priceless.
Yeah.
Like that's something you hold forever. And it's so cool, right? Because over the last 2 years that we've done this, we've been able to include people in such interesting ways. I mean, the first time we did it with issue 2, somebody got to be a murder victim, like of our series antagonists, like the first one. And like for you, for example, you actually get to be a historical figure in the Norman conquest. You know what I mean? So how often do you get to do something like that?
Yeah. Like I said, it's something that's it's rare to see, and it's fun to do, and the money's going to support, indie creators like yourself. So it's not like you're wasting money. You're literally helping somebody achieve their goals and dreams, and what better way to do it than getting a little trade-off for it. That's why the perks are such a big deal about indie comic creation, is because people want to invest and be a part of it, versus where, like, you buy Marvel and DC comics, you're just buying the comic and you don't really know much of, the creators. I mean, you may know them on social media and stuff of that nature, but they're not connecting with you in the way the indie comic creators do. And then going out of their way to really design, like, your pens, you know what I mean? It's something simple, but you definitely took the time. You asked, you asked around, was like, this a good design for my pin? What would you guys like to have? So on and so forth. So it's really important, and I think it's good to have that connection. That's why I love the indie comic community so much.
Dude, yeah, it's a very sort of special relationship for a creative person to have with their audience because it's so direct. I
Mhm.
mean, it is kind of like the angel investing of comics.
Yeah.
And, unlike these larger corporations, I'm not making this to sell you something else. I'm not
Mhm.
making this to sell you a toy or a video game or a movie. I'm making you this to entertain you, to move you, to connect with you. You know what I mean? Like, I'm
Mhm.
here to tell stories. I'm not here to sell you toys.
Yeah. And then, yeah.
And that makes the interaction that a reader can have with the material that much more special, that much more pure, and that's what we're here to do. I mean, specifically, like, and especially with this project, it's not a commercially, like, in no way did I ever think about how I was going to sell this project.
Mhm.
This is the least, I mean, I haven't done a lot yet, but it's certainly a lot less commercial than a book about, Cold War genetics conspiracies and shape-shifting aliens.
Mhm.
This is me saying, as a young creator, I want you to get on board for me as a voice in this industry because I have a lot to say. I have a lot that I want to talk about, and a lot of stories to tell. And I want to do it in different ways that are exciting and new, and also, you know, have respect and appreciation for the titans that built our industry, that laid the brick that we walk on. And that's very much like what this Minutes to Midnight collection means to me.
Yeah, definitely. And we're gonna dive into we're gonna talk about the stories here and everything in a minute. But like I told you offline, my children would like to ask a comic writer some questions.
Mhm.
My two boys. So we're gonna bring them in, have them ask a question, give them an answer, and hopefully inspire some young minds to follow the path of creativity.
Absolutely.
All right,
Absolutely.
hold on, let me call the first one in here. Uh, hold on. There you go.
So I wanted to ask, what made you feel to write Area 51?
Oh man. So first of all, it's nice to meet you, buddy. Uh Second, it's I was in a very weird part of my life, I thought I was going to finish off school and become a doctor and do all of these other crazy things with my life. And, before the pandemic hit, I had the opportunity to maybe work for Marvel, and the pandemic took that away. And I didn't know how much I wanted to make comics until that opportunity was no longer there for me. So I think Area 51 came from um, that loss of the opportunity, but it was also, the book is about how we understand ourselves and use our identity to give us strength. And it was a time in my life where I don't think I quite knew who I was, and I was trying to figure that out. And so I kind of used the book to do that for me, and that's where that story came from.
Wow.
Mhm. All right, James, come here. Put the headphones on and talk into the microphone.
Hey,
Hey, pal, how are you?
I am good.
Nice to meet you.
Cool. So what inspired you to make Area 51?
Hmm. Well, I went to school for molecular biology, for college.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest piece of advice that I got from the writers that I liked was that I should write what I knew. And I spent a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money learning about cells. And I thought about how I could spin that into a story. And I wanted to tell a story about somebody who had a lot of potential, but didn't quite he didn't know how to use it. And so I kind of told this story about a character who could shapeshift and change his form anytime he wanted, but wasn't very comfortable in any of those forms that he could become. And so the that kind of came from my education, because I didn't want it to go to waste in any way. But also, like I told your brother, um, it was a very weird time in my life where I think I didn't quite know who I wanted to be, and so I kind of used the story to help me work through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so technically, Area 51 is similar to Naruto because Naruto can transform into different people that he wants to be.
Maybe, yeah, in some ways.
I'll say, my dad can continue talking, ask, and continue the interview.
All right, close the door on the way out, buddy.
That was cute, man.
He said like he's similar to Naruto.
That's gonna be my new pull quote for the media.
All right, so let's get into the nitty gritty. Minutes to midnight, the hour between life and death. I'm very interested in that title because there's two different things you can pull from there. When I first initially read Minutes to Midnight, it immediately makes me think almost like a doomsday clock. Like it's closing in on the final hour. You know what I mean? We're reaching that point. And then in the hour between life and death, I think it opens it up more to more than just the final minutes, but more to an aspect of there's some more story here, but this is the last push almost. You know what I mean? What made you, what inspired you for this title? And is there any real significant, obviously there's significance behind it, but what's your significance behind it?
Yeah, man, I wanted to tell stories about perspective and how important that is. And when I thought about that theme I wanted to interweave throughout all of these stories, I thought about midnight. You know, it is the birth of a new day and the death of the old. And it is the precipice on which these 2 days lie. And where what matters most is the perspective that you choose to take with you into the new day, right? Like, what lessons have you learned from the day prior that you're bringing with you? What battles have you fought? What were your failures? What were your successes? And how are you taking that into existing, tomorrow? And I, all I could think about was like this notion that in that moment, in that pocket of silence, you are either afforded this late night clarity, right? You're able to work through your problems. You have that sort of moment's breath that you need, or it's that sort of awful echo chamber where you're at war with the voices in your head. I think either one of those are probable. And I kind of wanted to tell 4 stories that revolve around this idea that in order for them to stay alive, both physically and sort of emotionally and mentally, they had to take a step back, and they have to grow and let the world tell them, and let their experiences tell them what to do, and just kind of, it is about carrying that level of perspective, that level of not necessarily distance, but there is a moment where you have to take a step back and think about what's happened, and how that is going to affect what is going to come. And I think that we lose sight of that a lot. Like, this story was written, or the story was conceived during the pandemic, in a moment where it seemed like everybody was fortified in these echo chambers, and there was a lack of perspective, right? Like, nobody could discuss, nobody could have discourse. And I think that is problematic. In order to grow and change, you've got to be able to take a step back and look at the wider picture. And it's okay if you maintain the same philosophies, but now they are supported by a greater understanding of what surrounds it, and who is being directly impacted by it. And so that's kind of where these stories came from in a larger picture. I mean, they're all very different, and they all attack the theme of perspective from a different angle. But that was kind of the through line, you know, at the time, I mean, during the pandemic, I was 22, 23 when it was at its height. And I mean, man, it's a weird time growing up where it feels like I feel like I'm growing up and I want to be exposed to as much as I possibly can. And it seems like the world and the people in it are trying to shelter themselves from any sort of unidentified foreign objects, you know?
Yeah. No, it's a much better interpretation of the title than mine. And I love that, you know, and that's one of the reasons I love talking to creators and writers, because there's so much more depth into what we actually see just on the surface, or what our interpretation would be. Now I want to talk about the stories. It's 64 pages. How many stories and how many pages is each comic? Do you know?
Okay, so the page counts of each story are going to be kind of rough because I don't remember exactly for all of them, but
Yeah.
the entire book is 64 pages. The first story, Reflections and Other Little Devils, is 22 pages. The second story, The Marvelous Misadventures of the Melancholy Man, is 6 pages. The third story, Time Fleeting War Immortal, I want to say is 19 or 20 pages. And then The Bear Market Businessman is 11 pages. That's roughly the breakdown.
That's still pretty good. I like that, because you're almost getting multiple full length issue #1 comics in there. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely a lot of bang for your buck, a lot of variety, and also, you know, it's not so much variety that you don't get enough of a taste of the bigger picture. You know, I mean, having two basically full size single issue length stories in there, I think will give you enough to chew on with those nice interstitial breaks of something short and sweet and to the point.
Yeah, yeah, and I do want to point out, like, if the price is an issue for anybody, I think that's something that I was just thinking about this, is that Marvel and DC one shots roughly 53 pages, and that's with cover, with info, with an ad page, maybe even 2 ad pages. And then you're not even necessarily getting a full story. You might also be getting a side story in it, but you're looking at like 50 pages, 53 pages for $8 or $9. You know what I mean? And it's not the same quality. You're not getting that's digitally. You know, you're not getting the same quality that you would with, because we've seen your comics, you know, if a lot of people have anyway, and they're high quality, they're high gloss. You know, I don't know the exact terminology for the type of paper that it is, but it's absolutely phenomenal feel in your hand. Like, it feels like a good sturdy comic book, versus what you can get today in the comic shops are super flimsy, almost feel like just crap paper and covers and all of that together. Like, so what's the issue #1 digital price?
Digitally is $10.
See, that's what I'm saying. $10, you're paying $2 more. You're getting a lot more pages, and it's action packed with good stories. Like, how is that? You know what I mean? How can you not support that if you're into finding new stories? That's what blows my mind. Because $8 for a Marvel and DC one shot versus $10 for yours, getting almost 10 more pages than a regular one shot or something of that nature. Like, it's easy investment for me. I don't like
Yeah,
I'm getting angry right now, and I all right. So let's move on to reflections.
sure. Also, side note for those that might also be interested in snagging the Helix project digitally, you can get both for a total of $19. Like
Nice.
if you are just a reader, you don't want to deal with the physical thing, they're often like 400 DPI, so they're incredibly high res. You could zoom into those things for ages. But yeah, $19 gets you 228 pages of
Oh, hell yeah.
content. So I think it is a bargain. And then if you are the collector, you want the physical product. I mean, the cover quality is insane. It's basically a card stock coming in and over a 100 pound paper stock, 80 pound interior pages. I mean, it's like you are getting the quality of a miniature trade in your hand.
Yep.
So
Yeah, and
yeah,
that, and you know, that's my whole thing of getting angry with it. It's just like, I want people to understand the quality of your books, even in comparison to other indie comics and to Marvel and DC. It's just such a high quality. It's nice to see somebody put in that little extra care. You know what I mean? Just that, because that
yeah.
it's a little extra experience added to your comic book reading. When you put it in your hand, you're like, wow, this feels really good. Like, and it makes you even more excited. It takes you into the experience of reading a comic.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, it wasn't too long ago where I was just the consumer.
Yeah.
So I can relate to everybody out there who wants great story and wants to be able to buy a comic without breaking the bank and actually have it stand the test of time. I mean, these are, I think about that a lot, and how I want my floppies to exist well beyond the time I'm gone. Like, I hope they don't just like disintegrate in people's hands, 15, 20 years from now, which I think is a lot of practice. Comics are periodical. Yes, I get that, but they don't have to be awful quality. I mean, people collect these, people hold them forever, pass them down from generation to generation. And I want mine to be able to do that. I want people to get their money's worth long term for these
Yeah.
books. And frankly, we're charging the same price as the people who are giving you, I think, lackluster printing quality material. And I think the only leap to take at that point is to trust that I'm going to tell you a good story, which, I might not be able to be the guy to say that, but I think we've gotten enough folks out there on the internet who are kind enough to do that for me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree 100%. All right. So let's move on to Reflections. That's the first story in Minutes to Midnight, correct?
Yes, sir. Yep.
All right. So Reflections. Why Reflections, and what can we know about the story without giving too much away?
Yeah, so this one is definitely the most experimental. This is me being the most aware about the comic book form I've ever been. I got to reteam with the artist that took over the last two issues of the Helix project, Samuel Iwunze, and he actually colored his own work in this story. And we thought about the successes of the Helix project. What specifically about us teaming up at the end of that book made it special? And one was always the emotionality. We lead with the emotionality and the human connection. And two is the way we're able to use the design of the storytelling visually to affect not only the speed at which you're reading, or the pace, I should say, at which you're reading, but the way you feel about how you're reading it, right? How do we use design to change atmosphere and tone? And so this book is the closest thing I think that you'll see uh, so far in my work that could be compared to like an old school DC Vertigo comic. I mean, we're experimenting with the form of comic book storytelling in a big way. If you go to the Kickstarter page, I mean, you'll see the first page of Reflections, and it's like this mosaic of panels almost. And so I think at bare minimum you'll be able to tell that we are pushing ourselves and not getting comfortable or stagnant with how we are trying to tell the stories. But this story specifically is a grim and moody mystery about an aging detective named Carlos Mancebo, as he investigates a string of suicides linked to a stretch of addresses involved in an eminent domain seizure attempt that had failed about 20 years prior. And the discoveries that Carlos makes after reopening the case and his drug-laden flashbacks lead him into the gullet of a Saw-like murder case that ends up putting his long-dead, drug-addled marriage into question. And his story ends up kind of diving into one of sharp-edged, a sort of a sharp-edged tale of perception, of control, and addiction, really. So this story is about how the reflections that we look at in the mirror, the way that we understand ourselves, ultimately affects the way that we interact with the world around us. And sometimes the way that we understand ourselves, the way that we perceive the reflection and the look of the other person that stares back at us in the mirror, is is manipulated by people outside of ourselves, you know, by other people. And so how are we letting other people control our perception of ourselves and therefore the world around us? And what does that mean? Right. And so we felt like the coolest and most sort of poetic way to do that was through this crazy paranoia induced detective thriller.
Do you feel like Reflections is an open and shut story? Do you feel like there's more that you would add on later on, or do you feel like you told the story that you needed to tell?
It's weird. So I think I feel very good about the ending, but admittedly, after I put it down for a little while, I started thinking about ways that I could continue the story. So I do think that there is a chance that we could spin something a little bit longer out of it, although that wasn't my intention going in. Funnily enough, this story already doubled in size. This was originally only going to be about a 12-page story. And I got it. I got about as far as I was going to when I was where I was going to end it. And to be honest, it felt good, but I knew there was more. And I just kind of I just let myself keep going, and eventually this story, as well as one other that we'll talk about a little later, ended up expanding so much that it cannibalized two other stories that were going to be in the collection. So while you're getting the same page count, two stories kind of ate two other stories that I'm sure you'll see later. Like I'm sure I will put them into play later, but I really wanted this collection to I wanted it to allow these stories to be whatever they needed to be in order to, you know, actively tell the best stories they could. And so this is kind of a byproduct of that. But to kind of come back to that question, well, I didn't go into this thinking I was going to expand it. I actually do think that there is a potential that I continue Carlos's story, because the way we leave him at the end of this one is very shocking, but gives way to some consequences.
Nice. Yeah, I've always been a fan of murder mysteries, so I'm very excited to see exactly what you have going on with that. Actually, as a teenager, I used to read. I read all the Sherlock Holmes stories, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so ever since then, I've been a huge fan of murder mystery. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that one is. What was number 2 again?
The Marvelous Misadventures of the Melancholy Man.
Marvelous Misadventures of the Melancholy Man. That's a lot to say. It's a lot to remember.
That's probably my favorite title.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
it's a fun title. I enjoy
Yeah.
it very much. You know, it's just something you don't get too often. Is a name or a title that's not necessarily easy, like Reflections, but it actually draws you in a little bit. You're like, okay, well, what's that about?
Yeah, I mean, also, I think, you know, we have truncated Reflections a little bit. The full title for that story is Reflections and Other Little Devils. But yeah, it does make it very much an easy roll on the tongue just to say Reflections. But yeah, yeah, I mean, Marvelous Misadventures of the Melancholy Man is so I mean, everything I'm doing here is different from what I've done before, but this, I think, is the biggest departure. It is a little bit more bright and animated and expressive, and that's thanks to the incredible Steph C, who is a comic and a comic artist, a film concept artist. She's just got this wonderful understanding of how palette can affect the emotionality of a story. And so this is the only story in the collection that I had planned to continue in the future. Every year I'd like to do a collection, and this was one that I was going to release chapter 2 of next year. But it is a supernatural coming of age story about an empathic boy who can turn others' woes into gold. So it is a little bit of a cheeky play on the Shakespeare mythology of King Midas and the Golden Touch. But it's sort of emotional, right? Like, instead of physically turning things into gold, he can make people feel like gold. And so this character, the protagonist, Midas, has to learn to find balance in a life where a simple touch could mean healing someone's mind at the cost of his own, or vice versa. And this first story, we kind of find him in this childhood conflict, entangled with the moral pendulum of how to use these abilities and what they mean for himself and for other people. And what's really, really fun about this story as well, for any longtime comic book fan, there is a side character who will reappear in every chapter to kind of mark the changes in Midas as a character. But this side character is a very, very well-known figure in the comic book industry. And I think the sort of metatextual conversation that this character will generate will be a very, very prominent feature of the story. You know, ultimately this story is an exploration of self-sacrifice and self-preservation and of how to find balance in those things. But I do think that any comic book fan will get a kick out of that character, who again makes his first appearance at the end of this story.
Nice. Yes, I'm very excited for that. That sounds fantastic. So let's dive into number 3.
Yeah, Time Fleeting War Immortal was the second story to have doubled in size. This was originally a 10-pager, 10-pager, and now it's a 20-pager. And in this one, not that it changed in its entirety, but the point of the story really evolved by elongating it. You know, when we made the decision to increase the space that we were giving Reflections and Other Little Devils, it was to continue and to mature and to execute on the ideas we already set forth. When I had expanded this one, it was almost like an entirely new pocket of storytelling potential was introduced. And in some ways, I think this is the most complex thematically speaking, the most complex story I've ever written. And so this is in some ways akin to the Divine Comedy, you know, like a Dante-esque historical fantasy that follows two nearly immortal soldiers as they reconvene throughout every great battle in human history to settle a conflict that spans from a time before time was measured to the end of all existence as we know it. And ultimately, this is a story about the changing landscape of war, how adversity is often conditioned by the times that we live in, and the fleeting ideals of the time. But ultimately, though, that whether you're immortal or not, we will never have enough time to do what we need to do what we want to do. And so you need to make it count.
I like it. That sounds absolutely phenomenal.
And
Right,
this is actually the story that, you know, for the hardcore comic breakdown fan, you will see Brian appear in, which is super fucking cool.
Yeah, that feeling that was the one.
Yeah. So, and he gets to appear as a historical figure, because we actually pick up with various wars throughout the course of actual human history for the most part. And
Nice.
so, so Brian kind of gets to be King Harold of the Norman conquest. So that's really, really cool.
I'm excited to see what your future looks like. That's going to be interesting. Because you said how much of it does it go into the future?
It goes to the end of life as we know it, man.
Okay. Yeah. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see your perspective on what the future holds and what the end may be.
It's, oh man, it's a weird, like when you open that page and you see what my understanding of the end of time is, or at least what it is right now at the ripe old age of 20. Well, I was 25 when I wrote it, but 26 now. I think it's going to be interesting and surprising in so many ways. So yeah, dude, I'm really, really stoked for you guys to turn that page and see the spread. But yeah, man, it's such that story. It really, really has come to mean a lot to me, because like I said, it just evolved into this very complicated story, you know, and when you play with the more traditional understanding of comedy, it is inextricably linked to tragedy, right? Like this is the school of again Dante Alighieri and Shakespeare and John Milton, you know. So there is like a classical, like, bittersweetness to this story that I think will leave people, you know, it's like, have you ever seen Do the Right Thing, the Spike Lee movie?
Yeah.
You know, like you walk out of that thing and you're like, it's undeniable that this was a great movie that made me feel all different types of ways. And at the end, you're just like, I don't know how to feel right now. You know, like it makes you chew on something for a while, and it sticks with you. And so that's kind of what I went to do in this story. It's
Yes.
such a bittersweet ending, and I think there's going to be a lot of interesting conversation around what it means.
Yes. That sounds awesome. That sounds fantastic. I'm very excited about that. Yeah, because I love a good ending that just leaves me like, damn. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just I love, and that's why I love cinema so much. You know, that's why I'm so heavily into film. It's because there's so many good stories out there. I'm more of a darker kind of story anyway. You know what I mean? I love the post-apocalyptic. I love the failure of humanity. I love
Mhm.
seeing our hubris, you know, essentially be our downfall, and seeing us fall because of ego and all of these other emotions. And so
Mhm.
it sounds like it's definitely going to be a nice and interesting ending to dive into and really explore.
I think so. Yeah. Have you ever seen Children of Men?
Yes.
Oh my God, it's like one of my favorite movies of all time. Like, just speaking on what we were talking about there. Yeah, that's like such a huge storytelling
the
influence of mine.
the first the first ever real shock I got from a movie that made me want to seek out more stuff, the ending just blew my mind, was The Mist.
I haven't
The
seen that
Mi-
one.
oh my god, The Mist is so good. I'm pretty sure it's Stephen King.
Mhm.
Um and essentially the story premise is a mist comes in, and there's things in the mist, and you see the shift in survivors in between faith and religion, and following what somebody might say without question because of your instincts of fear, and just wanting
Mm.
having that survival kick in. But the ending is something that just blew my fucking mind. I was just like, oh my god, this is like, I sat there for days afterwards, and I was just like, damn, this is, I can't believe that happened.
Dang, I gotta watch it, man. Like, maybe you know what? I'll be on a plane to Charlotte in like 2 weeks for a convention.
Mhm.
Maybe I'll download it on my tablet and watch that on the trip.
It's well worth it. I absolutely love it. All right, so the story number 4, and it's the final story of the collection.
It is indeed. Yeah, it's the bear market businessman. This one is really interesting because, in a conceptual sense, it's the simplest of the 4 stories.
Mhm.
But it is me being my most emotionally vulnerable in some ways and my most emotionally honest. It is kind of raw in that sense because I think it tells the story is the most real. You know, the least impeded by genre in a good way, right? Like, genre is a tool that we can use to push stories forward and to push their themes and their characters to a breaking point. But this one uses genre almost more as a set piece that looms over these characters and affects their lives. And so this is a sort of interpersonal sci-fi future, um, which is centuries, centuries ahead of us, in this neon adorned New York City as it weighs down upon the richest man on the planet, who kind of somehow has everything and nothing at all. And on the edge of life, he kind of has to decide and or figure out, I guess, that the key to surviving is the choice to live. You know, there are all of these impediments in life that make us question why we're here, and why we should engage with it to begin with. And there is an element of it where you have to close your eyes and choose to live a certain way, right? And to live in general, right? Like, I think a lot of people struggle with that, and it's incredibly relatable. It felt like the perfect story to close out this collection with, just because I think it's the one of the 4 stories that the people are going to walk away feeling the most emotionally involved with.
Nice. Fantastic. Um so with that being said, I want to know Not necessarily what inspired you to write this, because I've asked you that before, which would be an interesting thing to dive into. But I want to talk about what excites you most about this comic. Like, what makes you just like this is what I want to talk about. This is what I want to express when I talk to you about Minutes to Midnight.
Well, it's just the most creatively pure thing I've gotten to do so far. You know, I mean, like it is me unleashed. You know, I get to tell different stories with different characters, say different things, play with different genres. You know, this is my like Superman Unchained moment where, you know, early on in my career, I want to set the precedent that I won't be pigeonholed. I loved Area 51, the Helix Project, and yeah, maybe my skill set, you know, and my education caters to something like that, but I don't want to just be the sci-fi guy. You know, I want to be the guy that's just known that to tell stories well, engage with the comic book art form in new and creative ways, but also, you know, just somebody that tells stories that matter to people, you know, on a deeper level, stories that connect to people that they can relate with. And you know what, man, like, not that I'm the like Gandalf, the the white is the one that was like wise, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
white.
Gandalf. Yeah, get the white.
Gandalf the White. Not that I'm Gandalf the White, but you know, maybe someone will learn something from it or take a new perspective because, like, certainly over the course of writing these stories, I've learned something, you know, and I can't teach myself. These characters taught me something, their journeys taught me something. And that's what's really exciting, right? Like
Yeah.
it is pure, unbridled creativity, and I get to do it with some of the best artists in the industry, and a lot of which people don't give their flowers to. You know, we have Samuel Iwunze on Reflections and Other Little Devils with letters by Jerome Gagnon. You have Steph C. Doing the art for The Melancholy Man with letters by Micah Myers. You have Marcio Freire, who was the colorist for the entirety of the Helix project, doing Time Fleeting War Immortal. And
Nice.
then you have Ryan Best doing art for The Bear Market Businessman. These are largely names that people don't really talk about in the industry, but they're freaking incredible. I mean, like, I think if anything, you know, I feel confident about my ability, but the thing I'm most proud of is my ability to spot talent in an artist and also to understand how to put them on the biggest stage possible and to give them the highest success rate possible. And so, like, these guys are absolutely blowing my mind. And in many ways, you know, I feel like I've learned so much from being able to collaborate with all of them on these different stories. And I think that's such a unique thing to explore is it's like you're looking at a young writer through all of these different lenses, you know, and I think like that's the unique opportunity about something like crowdfunding is that it's so direct and it's so personal. And you know, you who's listening or watching this on the outside, you want to see what I'm all about as a writer. This is a great sample size. This is a great way to see whether or not you feel like I'm going to be someone you're going to want to follow, you know, and you also just get an absolute smorgasbord of beautiful, beautiful comic book art along the way. Also, shout out to our cover artists, man. So we have Samuel Ibunze did the B cover, Marcio did the A cover. We have the incredible Fraser Irving on the secret variant, cover C. And then D will be unlocked if we can hit $9,000. And once we hit 5K, we will reveal a beautiful cover by the incredible Kanan White with colors by the equally incredible Jesse Hagee. I don't quite know how to pronounce it, but you know, this is a visual like buffet of some of the best art in comics. And whether you come there for me and for these super corny stories that I'm trying to tell you or not, you got them at bare minimum, and that is like empirically undeniable.
Yes. No, hands down. So yeah, I do want to talk about Sam for a moment, just because his artwork is definitely what attracted me to Minutes to Midnight. Obviously, I'm a big fan of your work. I love what you do, but I'm a big visual person. And so
Mm.
when I saw the cover to Minutes to Midnight, I was just like, oh, hell yes. Like,
Mm.
this is 100% something that I want to read. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, oh, it's going to be cool because I'm drawn into the comic, but I might not like it. You know what I mean? Like, right off the bat, I see that cover and I'm like, damn. Like, if this is anything to attest to what the story will be like, then hands down, I'm in on it. You know what I mean? So I wanted to talk about Sam because you've told me the story about how you found Sam and how he became part of your team. But I really do want to put the spotlight on him and give some flowers to him. You know what I mean? So where did you find Sam, and what was it about his artwork that really appealed to you?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question, man, because working with Sam on the last couple Helix Project books, I mean, like he is responsible for me taking the leap in storytelling ability that I feel like was taken, from issue 4 to issue 6. I mean, like it was drastic. I mean, the writer that I was by the end of issue 5 was night and day from the writer that I was before he picked up with issue 4.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because it kind of like his work kind of opened my eyes to what was possible and what we could do. And it almost felt like the shackles were off, right? You could, in the words of Michael Keaton's Batman, you want to get nuts, let's get nuts. And I met Sam, like he had done some covers for a couple folks in the indie community. And I was like, man, he's got like such beautiful textures, and the way he plays with palettes are interesting. And I needed a third cover for issue 4 at the time because it was at the time it was shaping up to be our best one yet, and we had unlocked a third cover. And I wanted to do something that was really narrative, something that would pull at people, because the ending of issue 3, if you remember, with the encounter, there are helicopters everywhere, and there's like there's a very, very big last page. And I kind of wanted somebody to pick up this new cover after reading issue 3 and go, whoa, like we're really leaning into what happened at the end of that issue. And what really struck me about Sam wasn't that he necessarily like immediately had the perfect cover. It was that we started with something, and by going back and forth talking about our intentions creatively, we were able to turn it into this incredibly rich and narrative cover. And it's beautiful. Like on a technical level, it is also beautiful, but it is like the covers for me were always an opportunity for the storytelling to begin. And Sam aced the assignment, on that regard. And when issue 5, when I was preparing to start issue 5, I knew that there needed to be a change, and I really loved the process of working with Sam. It was different than just making a cover. It was conversating about storytelling, and sort of the craft of the storytelling. And I had basically, floated the idea to see if he was interested, asked him to do a couple character profiles, and just kind of laid out the groundwork that there's a level of stylistic similarity that I want to stay in keeping, just so that it's not an abrupt transition between artists. But ultimately, that if he felt like he needed to make a change, that I was bringing him on because I believed in his ability. And if that's what we got to do, that's what we got to do. And, the beginning of working on issue 5 was kind of the same, right? Like there were some really, really good bones, but what we were able to turn it into with our back and forth was like out of this world, just better than anything I could have imagined. And so we get about, I would say maybe we had 10 pages of rough pencils and maybe 4 or 5 inks. And I was like, okay, don't read past page 12. I'm going to re-edit the last part of the script. And I added 4 pages because I was like, this guy, like we're capable of really stretching the way that we're delivering the story. None of the plot changed, but the way that we basically at this point, I knew the kid gloves were off and there were no more punches that had to be pulled. We could go full steam ahead and really deliver this story in a special way. And that's why, for example, if you read through issue 5, there are 2 double-page spreads in a row, which is so unlike me. That's not me. That's not my style of storytelling. But with Sam, I knew we could do it, and we could play with the composition of those pages. And there are a total of 3 double-page spreads in that book, which, again,
Nice.
uncommon for me. And it was kind of from that moment on, I knew that we just had a very special creative relationship where, I'm so grateful for the collaborators, all of the collaborators that I've had, but there's something about the way he and I click about how we can basically swallow someone whole in the storytelling experience, in a way that I don't know is discussed as much in comics. And it was just kind of this perfect series of events. And luckily, he had good enough a time with issue 5 that he was open to finishing the story with me. And then, when it came to Reflections, it was a special opportunity to start something from the beginning together, and for both of us to have our creative DNA all over it, rather than, him picking up something I started elsewhere. And I think that was really, really special. And that's also why we were like, listen, if this is going to be an Iwunze Fernandes project, then it was going to be different. And it was going to take everything that we learned from working together over the last 2 books and take that up to 12 and push ourselves and kind of deconstruct our understanding of how comics even work in some ways. And find a way to put it back together in a whole new way. And so, yeah, man, that's just such a special creative relationship. And I'm so grateful to have had it. I had joked, when he sent me the last page of issue 6 of the Helix Project, I explicitly have the email where I'm like, move over, Snyder and Capullo, we have arrived. Just, it is very special, to be able to connect with somebody like that, because the stories that I tell are very, very personal. And so when somebody is going through those scripts and translating them, it's almost like it's like I'm playing trumpet and they're the instrument, right? I have the mouthpiece, but they're the one that makes it music. And so that's it's such a special, such a sort of special relationship to have with somebody, right? Because you're in these stories, at least, I kind of leave my soul bare for someone to translate and to turn into a song. And yeah, and I think he's just done that exceptionally well. Ultimately he's made pieces better than I could have ever imagined. And that's something I'm so grateful for, especially this early in my career, So yeah, Sam is an insane talent. He's also produced some of my favorite covers of any of the books ever. I have his cover to issue 6 of the Helix Project tattooed. I couldn't ask for a better collaborator.
And that's the awesome thing, because as a consumer, you don't really think about the idea that as a writer, you're going to be influenced by your artist.
Absolutely.
Especially when you guys are working how you're working. You know what I mean? You don't really think about that. You're just thinking about okay, well, he writes it and then he draws what, the artist may want, maybe adding some stuff into it. But the fact that you two are going back and forth and really working, not necessarily around each other, but you're working with each other. You're learning from one another and making yourselves more entwined, so it's more symbiotic. You know what I mean? So you guys are definitely on the same page, and you guys, I think you probably give him more free reign than some artists would probably give. There's some that will write out, panel for panel, this is what I want drawn into it, how I want drawn into it, so on and so forth. But it seems like you're becoming more trusting of him as an artist.
Yeah, it's interesting because I definitely write full scripts, and I can be very directive. But the thing about Sam is that he takes it as a jumping off point and makes something better.
Yeah.
He's the guy who I give the least pushback to, especially if he does something and most of the time he's able to break it down to me in a way where I'm like, I'm in on it. I'm in
Yeah.
on it completely. You know, I never second guess it, and that's kind of special. You know, I mean, yeah, I mean, that was the first time. I mean, working with him was like the first time where I was ever like, whoa, okay. You know, like maybe on some of these situations, I don't have to be so broad in my thinking. I can really fine tune the things that I think I bring specifically to the table and let Sam bring what he brings to the table. And it's kind of this perfect, like enzymatic reaction that results in, I think, some great and dare I say innovative storytelling in the comic book space.
Yeah, I think that's like that stuff right there is some of the best ways to get the best artwork out of an artist. And I speak just strictly from like a tattoo perspective. You know, I get so many tattoos, and I always tell the artist, like, I want you to take my idea and make it your own. You know what I mean? Because I feel like an artist, if you give them that kind of free reign, they're going to be more passionate about it. It's going to be more personal to them because it's something of their own creation. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
They're not just being told to, draw Superman with heat vision coming out. You know what I mean? Like, no, they're like, okay, take this idea and make it something phenomenal, but also fitting to the scene. And if you let an artist do that, you can really see them have their opportunity to shine and show you something that you couldn't even imagine was actually going to be something that you even wanted in your comic book.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's really really interesting just to see how that affects the finished product, right? Like in issue 6, there's a crucial moment. I think it's like it's a double page splash. I
Nice.
think it's the only double page
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
single splash image in the entire series, and I had laid it out from a very specific angle, and from a very specific shot composition. And in the roughs, Sam had delivered it at the exact opposite of what I had written, and that's what we went with because it was just better. It was just
Nice.
so much better than what I had written in terms of the visual directing, and that's what I love about the relationship is that, like, you know, he feels open and comfortable enough to present an argument and discuss it. And like in a situation like that, I didn't even need to discuss it. I was just like,
Mhm.
that, yes, best idea wins, and that is it. You know, and that's kind of what's cool about the creative process, right? Like, or at least that is for me. Like I'm very intentional with my work, and admittedly I am involved in every step of the process in a very intimate way, but it also, you know, I acknowledge like I'm bringing on guys like Sam because they're capable of things that I am not, and so it's always best idea wins mentality. You know, if there's something
Yeah.
that I feel like is undeniably central to the story in whatever way, then that's something that I'll argue for,
Yeah.
right? But I'm almost more excited by the idea of somebody bringing something to the table that I never thought of, because then it enhances the story in a new way, in a rich way, that I couldn't have done by myself. And yeah, I think that's such a major part of the process in just being deliberate but flexible.
Nice. All right. So we're closing in on an hour. So we'll close it out with now, like, hopefully this gets funded. Hopefully we're gonna get across that line. You put out Minutes of Midnight. What do you want to do next?
Well, um, you know, there were a couple things. I mean, we talked about off screen that I probably won't mention explicitly in the near future, but some plans kind of got shifted around. So, um, while I was planning on launching a 12 issue series, I think that's going to be put on the back burner for a little bit. And I'm kind of going to be spending some time with some other concepts that I was tailing around with. Um, but at some point in the next year, I would I would like to finally take Helix Project to trade and make a graphic novel, and maybe even remaster some of that old art.
Awesome.
Particularly like just a couple moments that I didn't care for,
Yeah.
that that I had to let go because of time constraints. You know, I want this to be like the author's preferred text, you know. And while I'm not going to make any big story changes, I'm not changing the way things are going to happen. I feel like there are in some ways opportunities um, to deliver those moments better and more effectively, based on not only the fact that we now have the time, but on the experience, right? I mean, the writer that I am now is even different from the writer that finished the Helix project. And I mean, the writer I am now is, I mean, um, uh, just like in an entirely different ball game than the writer that started the Helix project. So this is a cool opportunity. And also selfishly, like, I mean, I want to put one on my bookshelf. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
want something hardy. So that's coming. There is maybe a potential for a Reflections and Other Little Devils sequel in the works. But
Nice.
aside from that, it is a little bit up in the air, but I'm hoping to have a little bit more of a plan and announce it maybe by the summer, by the end of the summer.
You got some cons lined up. Why don't we let people know what cons you're going to be at?
Oh yeah, staying busy always. So middle-ish of June, I'll be at Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is like one of my favorite conventions ever. It's such a comic book centric show. It's for us, by us. It's run by a comic book store.
Nice.
You know, they've been doing it for 41 years, so they've really refined it. And yeah, that's such a wonderful show. July, I'll be in my local state, Connecticut, for Terrificon, which is also another very solid comic book centric show. August, hopefully, I will be at Fan Expo Canada in Toronto, just kind of waiting to iron out a few details. So hopefully, I'll hear back soon. September, I've got 2 big shows. One is Baltimore Comic Con, another great comic book centric show, and the Memphis Comic Expo out in Tennessee. In October, I will be at New York Comic Con. Whether I will be on foot or be posted behind an artist alley table is up in the air, but I will be there. And I'm very excited that in November, I will be going to Harrogate, Leeds in the UK to sign at the Thought Bubble Comic Arts Festival, which is like maybe one of the greatest honors of my career so far.
That's
So
awesome, dude.
keeping mobile.
That's going to be awesome. Hell yeah, dude. That's dope. I like that. Going international with it, bro. I dig it. I dig it. All right. So yeah, everybody make sure that you check out Minutes to Midnight. It is currently in Kickstarter. You can go there, you can get the digital comic. We already talked about the price. You already know how much it is. It's definitely worth investing in. You know, Trevor obviously put in some fantastic work into it. Sam and his other artists have also just absolutely blown my mind with their artwork. And I'm so excited to see what it is. So make sure you guys support it. You know, definitely helping out the indie community, getting these small writers, getting their names heard, getting them out there and letting people know exactly what's going on. If you guys haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you like the video. And with that being said, until the next breakdown.